Welcome to Behind the Smile with Ash Butterss, a podcast designed to reveal the truth behind the masks we wear. Together, we look to demystify the human mind and its behaviours in relation to mental health, trauma and addiction. My name's Ash and I'll be your host as we uncover the real stories of people's pain and the steps they've taken to live a life of freedom in recovery. From sobriety to spirituality, join me each week as we uncover the reasons why people seek recovery and how their lives have changed by living one day at a time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Smile. Today's guest is Victoria Vanstone. Vic is a prolific blogger, an author, a podcaster, and a mother of three living on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. Vic made the decision to finally reach out for help on the 10th of March 2018, and this is where her sober journey began. By the time this episode airs, Vic will have celebrated 5 years of sobriety. So let me start by saying, Vic, welcome to Behind the Smile and congratulations on 5 years.
Yeah, I can't believe it's gone so quickly, but I guess a lot has happened in that time as well. It's quite frightening how much you can do when you're sober.
I couldn't agree more. It's like all of a sudden you have all of these hours in the day and you can just do so much more with your life.
Yeah, instead of lying in bed with a hangover, it's a miracle, really. I could have done so much more with my life.
That's okay. At least we're starting it, we're getting it there somehow.
Yeah.
Now, Vic, before we dive into the photo that I've asked you to bring in today, I'd love for our audience to get to know a little bit more about you. So can we kick it off with you telling us where you live, what does an average day look like, and what are your hobbies?
Yeah, sure. Well, I live in the Sunshine Coast. I'm originally from the UK. My average day is chaotic, like most mums of three. I mean, I had my last baby when I was 42, so I'm nearly 46 now. So I'm probably extra tired just to being an older mum, I guess. But yeah, it's frantic from the moment I wake up until the moment the kids go to sleep. And then I have a Netflix and a cup of tea and I feel all right. But the in-between stage can be a bit tiresome at times. My kids are 4, 7 and 11. And after school drop off, hopefully all of them have gone to either kindy school or something. I tend to sit around the house and work on my little sober life, which is generally trying to get my story out there to help others that are stuck in a sort of Pinot Gris purgatory, I call it, a place between the pub and an AA meeting. So that's being on other people's podcasts. I'm writing, I'm blogging, I'm recording my own podcast with my mate Hamish, who's amazing, which is called Sober Awkward. And a lot of planning goes into that and a lot of research. So it's generally kids and sobriety, my life.
That sounds amazing. Was that sort of the stuff that you were doing prior to getting sober, writing and speaking and media, or is this a whole new world that you've stepped into in recovery?
This is absolutely a whole new world, Ash. Like, I never had motivation before I gave up drinking, and I started to write the day that I gave up drinking because I felt like the only person in the whole world that had ever quit a sort of socially acceptable binge drinking habit. I didn't know that people stopped before it got too messy. So I found that I felt alone in my sobriety very, very early on. And I decided just to write a diary about it, just for myself more than anything else. And I just started writing that day and I never stopped. And that became my blog, which has now become my book, which is out next year.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to read it. I know just a small amount about your story, and I'm really excited for our audience to hear more about that today. I'd love to now dive into the photo that you've brought along with you. So, Vic, I asked you to choose a photo from a time in your life where you were hiding behind a smile. You were projecting one version of yourself to the outside world, but the reality was that you were struggling on the inside. Now, being that we are podcasting right now and our audience cannot see the photo, could you describe for our listeners what the photo looks like and what's going on for you at that time?
It's a photograph of me standing on a beach when I'm pregnant with my second child. I remember I'm in a polka dot blue bikini and I'm smiling and I look happy and rosy cheeked, which I did do most of the time throughout all of my life. So, of course, why would you ever question me or wonder if something was wrong. You don't question somebody who's got a smile wiped across their face and looks hunky-dory. But the fact was, the reason I got pregnant at that point and was so desperate was to stop a sort of spiraling alcohol issue, which I only recognise now. But the smile is exactly doing what you say. It was hiding an issue that was getting sort of soaked into the crowd and absorbed by the people I surrounded myself with. So no one ever pulled me up on it.
At that time, did you know deep down that something was a bit amiss or something was going wrong? Or had you almost convinced yourself that everything was okay?
I knew I was concerned about the fact that I kept on doing something that was causing me to have anxiety. I knew, but all I thought about doing was to try and be a better drinker. I never thought, gosh, I should stop this, because alcohol has been so ingrained in me for such a young age that considering total abstinence was never popped into my mind, quite simply. I just thought, well, what do I need to do just to make me a better drinker and to make me not have these awful hangovers where I feel guilt and shame and can't look after my child? So I remember trying to get pregnant thinking, yeah, of course I wanted another baby, but at the same time, it was the perfect excuse to say no again. And I could, float back into that perfect bubble, that 9 months of freedom where I had those windows of sobriety and go, okay, I'm safe again now. I'm safe from the anxiety. I'm safe from people offering me drinks, and I don't have to make any decisions about it right now. And I remember feeling that when that photo was taken as well. I can be happy now because I haven't got this monster, this anxiety monster peering over my shoulder who's like knocking to get back in.
You describe it so perfectly. I relate so much to that. And I also, for years and years, almost thought that it was a moral failing, that I couldn't drink like my friends. And, I always was the one that was throwing up at the end of the night or losing her phone or making an idiot of myself. And I'd wake up, just as you said, with that guilt, shame and remorse and really beating myself up until I got sober and realized that it's actually got nothing to do with our morals and our values.
No, it's alcohol doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
Exactly right. And you just described that big smile that you wore on your face, and you mentioned that you had done that for as long as you could remember. So can we take it back to your childhood for a moment? And I'd love to know, I'll speak for myself personally. I wore a smile throughout my life as a bit of a mask, and I was always, due to the environment that I'd grown up in as a child, I had learnt to adapt and shape shift to become the person that I thought I needed to be to make sure you were happy. So, we hear the phrase people pleaser thrown around a lot. Do you identify with any of that? Tell me a bit more about what it was like for you growing up.
I certainly do identify as a people pleaser. I think a lot of over drinkers definitely do. We don't drink for our own entertainment. In the end, we drink for the entertainment of others. And I am guilty of that 100%. The reason I found out, I never considered what are the reasons why I drink, and what has created this party girl. I just thought, well, this is who I am. But in therapy, after 40 years of heavy binge drinking, I got to delve deeper into what makes me who I am. And I know it sounds quite self-indulgent, and going to a therapist, you talk about yourself for ages, which I'm not really comfortable in doing. I always find that a bit odd, but I did it. I got on with it and I got through it, and I started to understand who I am as a person and what makes me act the way I do. And it turned out that even though I knew I was from a big party family, and I just always thought that was sort of a frivolous form of drinking, I never really considered everyone to have a problem. No one was drinking for sadness or for depression. It was always a sort of joyful environment to grow up in. It was a party environment where my parents were the hostess with the mostess sort of thing. Everybody came round for a cheap glass of sparkly and a dance in the living room. And it was a lovely place to grow up. I don't have any massive trauma. I was a very, very lucky kid. I had loving parents who just liked to party. Simple as that. I didn't really realise the influence that had upon me. I wanted to join in from a very early age. I saw from my parents that's how you got accepted and that's how you got liked, and how everybody wanted to come to our house because my parents were cool and funny and all of these things. So I wanted to be that. I wanted to mimic it. And my spongy little child brain was just absorbing all of that, thinking, well, I will keep friends if I'm a good partier. I didn't know that was happening, and that wasn't my fault. So that's the kind of environmental aspect of why I became a drinker. Then there was a tiny bit of trauma. Trauma, I've realised now, is sort of relative. Like everybody's got a bit of trauma, and it affects us all in different ways. And mine was a bullying incident at school that left me with a broken heart and my two best friends not talking to me. At the time, I just thought, oh, I'll move schools and I'll make new friends and that's fine. But now I realise the aftermath of that situation meant not only did I want to make friends, I wanted to make sure they stayed and that I kept them. So therefore, the only way I knew how to do that was to keep people entertained. And the only way I knew how to do that was to drink.
Right. So you were using it not only as a social lubricant, but almost like the glue that kept you close to those people and those friends.
Absolutely. I wanted them to stay. Like, I'd lost a couple of friends and I knew that I didn't want that to happen again. So not only was I probably drowning out that situation, I was also trying to make sure that it didn't happen again by saying, look, here I am. I'm loyal. I'm a good laugh. You can rely on me for the party. Let's get this show on the road. And I've always been a good friend throughout my life, but I think I realise now that that's been sort of disruptive throughout my life as well. It's meant that I've put myself in situations and at risk and all of these other things because alcohol was the source and the fuel that burned all of my friendships in the end.
And did you find that you were attracting like-minded people who also liked to drink the way that you did?
It's funny, I did write a chapter about this in my book. On my first day of university, I arrived with a crate of beers that my parents had given me, and I hung a sign on my door that just said "free beer here." So you can imagine the friendships that I made. I gave myself the reputation before I'd even walked in the door. It was like, here I am, free beer in my room, let's get this party started. So I didn't attract the sort of intellectuals of the university. I was like the best one at skinning up a spliff and somebody who could open a beer bottle with their teeth. That was kind of the people I attracted. But I didn't want to. I was just kind of this crazy, footloose and fancy-free party girl, and I didn't have any consequences to anything. So I never had to self-reflect.
And I suppose the more heavily ingrained your identity is with this heavy drinker or this party girl, the more you would hold on to that and want to protect that over time.
Yeah, it was just so ingrained in me that I didn't even realize I was protecting it. I just didn't know there was another way of being. I just thought, well, this is who I am and this is what I have to do. This is what people want from me now. So therefore I have to perform.
Now, I've heard you talk before in describing your behavior around drinking. You identify three, I'm going to call them three key pillars or three different identities. There's the loud one, there's the throwing up, and there's the promiscuous one. Can you talk to me about those different identities and how those behaviors were pulled out of you when you were drinking?
Well, I think with the loud one, it was just that my inhibitions were sort of sucked out of me after, promising to have one glass of wine when I went out. And as I said, I thought that's what people wanted. That's what made others happy. And with the loud thing, it was that I gave up on what I wanted for myself and gave everybody what they wanted. So even though I'm really not that person, I realise now, I knew that person made people happy. So there you go. There's the people pleaser in it's like a perfect package, isn't it? It was me giving part of myself away and abandoning myself for the sake of others and being loud and being raucous and being what I wasn't actually, because that's what alcohol does. That's how I reacted to it. And it made me more confident and not care what people thought about me anymore. So that played out in me always feeling probably quite exhausted and my hangovers being so filled with anxiety because I knew I'd been the loudest person in the room that I couldn't get over it. So therefore, the only thing I knew how to do was then plan my next drinking session.
And tell me about the physical impact it had, in terms of making you sick. Would you throw up while you were out in public? Was it something that you'd sort of end the night with? And did that ever trigger any thought in your head that maybe this isn't normal?
No, I never thought that. I used to have the old tactical vomit, I call it, throughout the night, where I'd go, I was a classic. I was a classic. I was the one that spilt your pint, was kind of climbing on a table, in a taxi going to an after party and doing a tactical vomit halfway through so that I could carry on drinking. I never, ever once questioned that behaviour. The next day, I was always more hungover than anybody else. And I also think, God, my hangovers are worse than everybody else. What's wrong with me? I never considered the fact that I had drunk 5 times. I realise now I had drunk 5 times the amount that everybody else had there. I gulped it down. I had a really bad drinking style, which I probably learnt from my peers, was that you drink until you fall over and you drink quickly. So everyone else is sipping on a glass of wine and I've already had 3 pints of lager. So it wasn't my hangovers, it was my drinking habit that was causing these terrible hangovers. But it took me years to look at that and to identify. And of course, the promiscuity, when your inhibitions have gone and when you're hammered and when you're drinking 5 times faster than everyone else, the self-care goes into a blackout. So my self-care was sucked into the abyss, and I just did what I thought men wanted me to do, which is unfortunate. And I'm humiliated by now, and I think a lot of women do it in our inebriated 20s, where we just think, I'm just going with the flow. I think I sort of felt I was a feminist, like using my body and being free. But actually, I look back now and think, gosh, I put myself at risk and people took advantage of me, and I was really unsafe in a lot of situations. And in fact, I thought it was a laugh, and everybody around me was doing the same thing, sleeping around, and it meant we had a good story in the pub the next day, and we all laughed it off over Bloody Marys. But actually, now it kind of makes my skin crawl when I think about the amount of times I had put my body at risk. It's awful.
Yeah. Everything you're saying, I identify with completely. It makes me, I think back to those times, and I had a really similar experience, and I feel really sad for that version of myself.
Yeah.
The one that I don't know whether it was that I was lacking self-respect or self-esteem, or I just didn't know any better. But yeah, I feel really sad for that version.
I feel sad too. Yeah. It's a sad thing. I always say now, like, if you see a party girl, don't go, she's a laugh. Like, don't give her a line of coke, give her a cuddle, because that is not a real person. That is somebody who is putting on a show for you, not for themselves. And it is derogatory to their own personality, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Tell me, when did you move to Australia then? How old were you? What was going on at that time?
I had lived in Thailand for 10 years and I moved here. I'd had some awful relationships and a tsunami and all sorts of things had happened. I blew a finger off with a firework on the Millennium Night, all sorts of crazy stuff. And I thought, I need to get away from here because I'm going to end up just like an expat propped up at a bar with a bottle of whiskey and I'll never come home. So I decided to move to Australia and I met my husband and we were engaged within 6 weeks. And I decided at that point that I needed some stability. My life had been this roller coaster of parties and nightclubs and beach full moon parties and all this other stuff. And I kind of thought, I remember sitting on a beach one day and thinking, God, I've seen enough bloody sunsets to last me a lifetime. I need to try normal. I need to try and, try a different sort of life that's a bit more stable. And that's exactly what I did. I moved to Australia when I was 33. I met my husband and we got married and I got pregnant very, very quickly. And that stable life started. But part of me was desperate to find that party girl again.
And so you fell pregnant in your mid-30s and stayed sober throughout that pregnancy. But I've heard you describe that transition from party girl to mum as being really difficult. Do you feel like you had lost that identity?
Absolutely. I didn't know who I was anymore. Without a pint of lager in my hand and a feather boa, instead of having a baby instead, I didn't know who I was. I was trying to be this mum, this perfect mum with the 3-wheeled stroller running along Manly seafront, looking all prim and proper. And I was trying my best to be this image of what sort of earth mother should be. And everybody thought I was doing great, but there was part of me that thought, God, what have I become? I'm so boring now. And I was stuck at home with this beautiful baby that cried all the time, up to my elbows in shit and nappies. And I was like, God, where's the old me gone? So the only way that I knew how to find her was, of course, to organise a mother's group night out very shortly after the baby was born. I think it was about 6 weeks after my son George was born. I was like, right, let's get this party going again. And I remember saying to the mothers group, right, who wants a night out? And them all sort of like going, yes, when are we going to do it? And I remember just thinking, gosh, yes, this is what I need. This is what I deserve. It was like a reward for all the hard work, for being this perfect mummy. I was like, yes, I can go and get fucked up and be this crazy person that I used to be just for one night. And that's exactly what I did.
And how did you feel the next day?
Well, I'd never had a consequence to my hangovers before. I'd never had a reason to worry or to reflect. And I remember waking up that morning after my first big night out, with mastitis in my boobs and just feeling rough, and guilt, anxiety and shame just kind of rolled over me as I lie in bed, because I could hear my day and my life going on without me, and I couldn't leave my bedroom. I couldn't even move my head. I was so hungover. I'd been doing shots and slamming, glasses of wine. And I think I'd like when you do a combination of drinks and it's just a disaster zone. I can't remember most of it. But I woke up and I knew that I couldn't hold my children. I couldn't hold my child that day. I couldn't function as the parent I wanted to be. And that caused all sorts of problems. My love for my child caused me to have problems and to question my own behaviour. But of course, the hangover dried up by the Thursday night at happy hour, and I was back at the wharf meeting my husband for a pint of lager with the baby strapped into the baby thing, the sling, and sitting down there and thinking that was perfectly okay. Hangovers are clever like that. It's like childbirth. Your body's designed to forget about it. And I forgot about it very quickly until the next time it happened. And every time it would build up. I'd have weeks of being this perfect mummy and having the right wraps and the right lunches and squeezy smoothie food and all that rubbish. And then I'd be like, oh God, who is this person? This is gross. I don't know who I am anymore. And then I'd go out again and the same thing would happen again, and it would build up. And I'd lie in bed every Sunday questioning myself. Why do I keep doing this? What's wrong with me? Why can't I be a better drinker? Why am I shit at moderation? Why, when I have one, do I then have two, even though I've promised I'll be home by 10 o'clock? All of these questions pounding around inside my head.
So there's a lot of different ways that people describe somebody who can't control the amount of alcohol that they consume, and anything from alcoholic to grey area drinker to having alcohol use disorder. I've heard you talk about the socially acceptable binge drinker. Can you tell me more about where you stand with all of that? How do you identify?
I do identify as a socially acceptable binge drinker, like somebody who got a pat on the back as they got a second round of beers in, somebody who got, cheered from the sideline as I went and got the key for the lock-in. I was never, ever a problem drinker in anyone else's eyes apart from mine on a Sunday morning. So therefore, I did fall into that grey area. I fell through the cracks where I felt like my problem, if it was a problem, wasn't deserving of professional support because it wasn't bad enough. So I didn't reach out for help, which is where I stayed for 4 years until I had my second baby in this no man's land, where I knew what I was doing was harming me and harming my family, yet it didn't feel bad enough for me to ask for help.
So your second child was born, and you've referenced before in some of the blogs that I've read of yours that at this time you couldn't stop partying. So can you tell me more about that next chapter after your second child was born?
Well, I just had 9 months of sobriety where I'd had this perfect, blissful window into somebody that I could be. And I'd really enjoyed it, and I'd promised to do better. And I didn't want to go out anymore. But then the mundanity of being a new mum with now 2 kids, it crept up on me again. I didn't go hard into partying after my second child. In fact, I only went out once, and that once was enough. I went locally to my local pub 6 weeks after she was born. She was really tiny and she wasn't feeding well, and it had all been really, really stressful. And of course, I was like, gosh, a night out, that's what I need, a reward again for my fantastic parenting, and to be myself and find a bit of the old me again, just so that I know I haven't, dissolved into this boring mum. So yeah, I went out and I got drunk, and I remember a man saying to me, hello, where are you from? Or something, being friendly, and me saying I've got a 6-week-old baby at home, and him saying, well, what the bloody hell are you doing here then? And it kind of sobered me up, and I walked home. And I woke up the next morning with the same anxiety. The anxiety had been getting much, much worse every time I drank. It was getting to the point where I would lie in bed with my finger on my pulse, saying to my husband, I think I'm going to die. I think I'm going to die. I need to go to hospital. My anxiety was causing a real mental health wobble for me. But yet still I ploughed on. And that time I got drunk, which is in fact the last time I ever got drunk, was it. It was enough. It had been years and years of me struggling and not knowing and not understanding myself. I knew when I woke up that morning, when I walked into the lounge to see my husband, I said, I cannot do this anymore. And I think the main thing I realized that morning was that I'm trying to do this, trying to do better and moderate and all these things, but I can't, and I'm failing. I'm failing at doing it on my own, and I need somebody else to step in and tell me what to do. Because I was doing something I hated that I knew was affecting my mental equilibrium, if you know what I mean. It was making my head wobble all over the place to the point where I thought I was going to die. And I knew that wasn't right, and I knew I didn't want that for my kids. Still then, at that point, not drinking 100% was not on my radar, but I thought I need to see someone to find out what is going on with me.
Tell me more about the anxiety for a moment. For somebody who's listening who thinks they might have experienced it, or they've got a loved one who is experiencing it, can you talk about, I saw you put your finger on your neck to check your pulse then.
Yeah.
So obviously accelerated heart rate, but what other sort of physical manifestations presented for you when you were having an anxiety attack?
For me, it was when I woke up in the morning, I would lie in bed, and it was as soon as the realization that I'd had too much to drink would hit me, it was like a wave crashing over me of fear. So that would run from the tips of my toes to the ends of my fingers, a sort of tingling feeling. And it was a sort of morbid fear. And it would be irrational thoughts. I call them fears of the forgotten, because I had no idea what I was remembering or not remembering. All I knew is that it was bad, and I'd probably offended someone or done something stupid. I never have. I was never a horrible drunk. I was always the life and soul, and probably a bit wobbly and a bit slurry. It was never anything too outrageous, apart from the old skinny dip and things like that. But nothing offensive, I don't think. I wouldn't know, though, quite honestly. But yeah, I would wake up and I would know it was like doom and gloom. I used to call it like this anxiety monster sitting at the end of my bed, pointing at me like the voice out of Wizard of Oz going, I know what you've done. You're a bad person. So it was like a physical thing, but the mental side of it was just so overwhelming for me. And my lack of being able to catch my breath would cause me to sort of almost hyperventilate, which meant my brain reacted to that as well. So it was almost like this cacophony of like awful things happening with my body and brain that just made me feel like total shit.
And did you ever think to go to the doctor to get medicated for that?
I had anxiety when I was in my early 20s. I was a recreational drug user. So I used to go and, party and take ecstasy and coke and all of these things. And I'd had an episode of anxiety very early on in my life, which led me actually to never, ever take a drug again when I was 22 or something. So I had a bout of it. And the problem was that I could feel it coming back. I knew how awful that period had been. I'd ended up moving home and having cognitive behavioral therapy and taking medication for it. And I never, ever wanted to return to that place because it was a very dark place at a young age. And I could feel that place returning every Sunday. I could feel that I was slipping back into a mental health episode like I'd had. And I knew that I had to do something about it before it got too bad. So I recognized it, which was actually really good that I'd gone through it before, because I recognized that I had to do something.
I remember myself, when I was daily drinking towards the end of getting sober that last 2 years, I was on anti-anxiety medication, but I didn't stop drinking. And so, of course, I've later realized that those medications don't work while you're drinking. That's why I was curious to know whether you tried to sort of balance the two. But the fact that you were able to identify that from previous experience and know that you needed to stop drinking for that, for then the anxiety to stop is brilliant. So for anyone listening, if you're experiencing that anxiety, it is proven to be induced from alcohol consumption. So stopping alcohol is absolutely the first thing that you should try if you want to try and alleviate that anxiety.
Yeah, it's all to do with that dopamine, and like what was happening inside my brain was that, and sugar, like the sugars were making me want more sugar, and then the dopamine and the reward center in my brain was making me want more of something that was making me ill. And that's exactly what alcohol is designed to do. It's designed to make you want more of it, even if it's making you feel unwell. It's really crazy that it's even like still a drug that's still out there saying, yeah, let's all have pints of beer and let's all moderate and stop at one. But the drug is designed for you to want more. So, of course, all I did was have more. It wasn't my fault. And I've forgiven myself a lot now. It wasn't my fault. It was the drug doing what the drug is supposed to do. And it isn't anybody's fault. And I think there's a level of guilt and shame with admitting that perhaps you have an issue with alcohol. I have an issue with alcohol because of alcohol, not because of me. And it's the normalization of it like that. Everybody going, yeah, it's fine. Just don't drink too much. But if you're someone like me, that is not an option to stop. There's a chemical in my brain that switches on and goes, right, once I've had one, I want two. I can't stop. And even if I did try and have one, I was still mentally connected to the second drink. So it was never, ever going to work for me. I was mentally overloaded with alcohol and preoccupied by that second drink, even if I hadn't had it yet. So one is not an option for me and for people like me, because you still have alcohol taking over your brain.
Exactly right. You've got that craving that occurs once you start drinking, and then the mental obsession. Like, I know that even if I was to have a break in my drinking from, say, Monday to Thursday, back when I still could, I knew when I was getting my next drink. I knew that, on Friday at 5 o'clock, I'd be catching up with the girls, and that's when I'd get to drink again. And I'd hold on throughout the week, like gripping onto life just to get myself. And then that moment I had that glass of wine or that vodka soda, it was like the warmth and the sensation would travel down my body. And it was like I was able to exhale for the first time in however many days it had been since my last drink.
Isn't that crazy? Because that is like the psychological fantasy that you've created for yourself there. Because, of course, I can get that feeling with a cup of tea now, but I understand that feeling, so that momentary second where you had that sip, you relaxed. But, of course, the alcohol doesn't hit your system for 20 minutes. So it's totally psychological that you've relaxed and that you feel better and you've got your reward. And it's funny that we go, I've had that drink and now I'm okay. But of course, if you psychologically, work your way up to that for a lint ball, you can get the same sort of level of release. I assure you.
Oh, it's so true, isn't it? Okay, I'd love to circle back now to that moment in the living room where you said to your husband, I need help. What did the days and the weeks that followed look like, and what did the support network look like that you engaged with?
I didn't really know what to do. Like, I quite fancied going off to some sort of posh retreat or something to try and, go and stay in a room on my own without any children and just chill out and somebody tell me what to do. But actually, I ended up just Googling a local therapist that said, it was called Breaking Free. And I just read those 2 words and like, that is exactly what I need to do. I need to somehow break free from this anxiety and this need that I feel to get drunk in every social situation I've ever been in my entire life. Like, what would it be like to not have that and break free from it? And I remember calling the lady, Diane, and just saying, Diane, look, like, she was like, what do you want? What are you here for? And I just remember thinking, I've got a little bit of a binge drinking problem, thinking it was quite funny. And she was like, oh yeah, we deal with that. Come in on Monday. I just thought, oh gosh, this is going to happen. And I remember going in and feeling quite nervous about it, but then just laying it all out on the table and going, right, this is my life. It's like a pack of cards. I want to take out what's wrong and what's good and reshuffle it a bit. And that's what we did. We kind of laid it all out on the table and was like, what's going on here? And it was amazing how delving into the past each Monday in this tiny little office in Maroochydore near where I live, it kind of revealed so much that I'd never, ever considered. And a lot of it was to do with heartbreak and society, in fact, and about my upbringing, and realizing that I never really had an option other to be a drinker, a big, heavy drinker. It was never, ever on the cards for me to not drink. And so therefore that let go of a lot of my shame and guilt. And I realized, a few weeks in, that it wasn't that I wanted to carry on drinking. It was that I wanted to start a completely new life. It makes me feel emotional when I talk about it. But yes, it was life-changing going to see someone, because all you need is someone else to draw that information out of you. I wasn't capable of doing that on my own. And it takes the right person for you to sit down and draw that stuff from deep within you, even if you think it's irrelevant. And that's what she managed to do, was just to allow me to feel sorry for myself and understand myself and get rid of all that shame that I'd been feeling about being a bad mum.
Vic, I did a similar process when I got sober and embarked on intensive therapy. And I still have a relationship with my therapist to this day, who I met, it'll be 3 years next month. And one thing that was made clear to me was that I'd been carrying around these core beliefs that I had adopted from early childhood that just no longer served me. And so for me, one of my core beliefs was I'm not enough. And that would drive and fuel my perfectionism, my people pleasing, and then I would drink on all of that because I just felt so unworthy within my own skin. Is there anything that you can think of that you think might have been fueling you that you now realize was an idea or something made up that just you needed to let go of?
I think it was the idea that I had to be always a certain way and that you cannot evolve as a human. I always thought, well, this is who I am. I never considered change. And now, after having therapy, after that 12 weeks, I realised that humans are capable of evolving. I'm not talking about your little finger falling off or your little toe falling off, like actually mentally evolving. And I feel like I don't know if anyone else cares or anyone else has noticed, but I know that I have evolved in some way. And I don't mean that in a smug way. I just know that I was a drinker and now I'm not, and my life is better. And for me, that is huge. And that plays out in so many ways throughout my life. And I never knew that of people. I mean, I knew people gave up stuff, and I didn't realise the impact. And it took me a few years into my sobriety to find my worth, like you say. I thought giving up drinking was just about giving up drinking. You give up, carry on with your life. But it's not about that at all. It's about finding out who is beneath the lies and the beers and the lager and the bravado and that mask that you mentioned. Who lies beneath all of that? And I think what you find as your sobriety goes along, which is why you have to be 100% abstinent, I believe, somebody else comes out of there. Someone else comes out of that shell that they've been hiding in. And that person is a lot more chilled, a lot more happy, probably, a lot more caring about their environment and the planet. It's somebody else completely. It's not somebody who's out there trying to keep others happy. It's someone who has boundaries. It's someone who has respect. It's someone who is not vomiting in a pub toilet every Friday and Saturday night. I mean, it's just a different person. And not everybody would notice that about me, but I know it about me. And that gives me huge strength to know that I can do that myself, and that now I can achieve anything that I put my mind at, because I have a sort of, I sort of have my own back. And whereas before I didn't, I gave away my own self for the entertainment of others, as I said earlier, and now I have my own back.
In early sobriety, a lot of people that I've spoken to have shared with me, and I can agree with my own experience, that it can be quite a lonely experience. Can you remember back to that first, let's say, 12 months? I would love to know, firstly, did you experience loneliness? And secondly, how did you tackle that?
Once I decided to fully go for it, I was sober for 18 months and I didn't tell anybody. And that was a huge change, because usually I'm one of those people who blurts out everything, I'm like, yeah, I've done this and I've done that, and I don't have any secrets. There's no mystery to me. But for that 18 months, it felt very, very private. It felt like what's important here for the first time ever is me and my kids and my husband. These are the people that know about this, and these are the people that matter. And I didn't feel the need to tell anybody. So I didn't. And actually, I pretended to drink for 18 months because I didn't want to talk to anyone about it. I held a beer when I went to a party. I didn't sip at it. And I just pretended that I was still the person that they expected. And it took me a while to step out of that. It took me that whole 18 months to go, right, okay, now I need to start talking about it. I'd started writing about it privately. I knew that my story was relevant because I knew everybody around me was like me in that way, where they thought their drinking was okay when perhaps it wasn't. And I think it is lonely in the beginning. And I think that's all right, because the chaos, it just means the chaos is over, That quiet time is the time where you heal and you learn about yourself. And there's nothing wrong with being quiet or being boring. Being boring actually is peace and tranquility. And my life before sobriety feels like this whirlwind, this kind of craziness with all this rubbish all flying around me all the time. And now I feel like I'm in the perfect description I'm going to give this to you as a gift because you can use it whenever you like. But for me, it was life-changing analogy. She said, imagine you're on a roundabout, you call them in England. Those things that spin around sometimes they have horses on. So imagine you're on one of those and all your family are there and all of your friends. Everybody's drinking and shouting and being loud, and you're spinning around really, really fast. Diane, my therapist, said, now step off and look back and observe. How does it feel? And I just remember the weight of 25 years of binge drinking just dropping off my shoulders and just going, oh my God, I can step off. I can step off and observe, and it's okay. And it changed everything for me, because I was like, I don't have to drink anymore. I don't have to be part of this. This can be my choice. And that was a huge epiphany, a big moment for me in my kind of recovery period, I guess. And since then, since that quiet 18 months, which I needed, I discovered that sober curious term. And I was like, oh, wow, there are people like me. There is a community that understands what I'm talking about. And that was like a big warm hug, that term. And I do relate to that term. Like, I was sober curious for many, many years. I'm now sober. I don't drink. But that curious, that word, that questioning summed me up 100%. But if you are feeling lonely in your sobriety, the good thing is that even since I gave up drinking in the last 5 years, there is so much out there now. There is so many books, so many websites, so many tools. People understand this as a problem. You don't have to, the bus doesn't have to have crashed before you get off. It's the same term, you don't have to reach these rock bottoms to be deserving of healing like I was. So, yeah, it's just about understanding yourself and recognizing yourself and using that time in early sobriety to walk the walk and talk the talk and do your research and exactly find out what sober life is and what it's going to involve. Because the chaos is over. You don't need to worry about that anymore. You can just slip into who you always are and who you were meant to be.
What was the response from your family once you told them you were sober? Not necessarily your husband, he would have known, but that family that is still drinking today, how did they handle it?
I just thought they were going to be so disappointed. I mean, I have a sister. My sister Louise is 23 years sober. So, and now I always even thought she was boring. I was like, oh God, what is wrong with you? You know, I hated sober people. They're like my enemy. Now I am. Now I can understand it a bit more. I have sympathy. I was a bit of a bully, a sober bully actually, but they've all been extremely supportive. And now I deal with people still drinking in different ways. You know, I don't go for dinner at people's houses that are drinking. I meet them for breakfast because I know it's safer for me. And I go for walks with them, or, you know, I make the situation bearable, and I know where my limits are. So it is hard for some people, I think. I think some people are probably slightly disappointed that I'm no longer doing the worm on some dance floor in the city at 3 o'clock in the morning, because it probably makes them self-reflect a little bit about their own drinking issues.
Yeah.
But I can't help that. You know, I can't help triggering somebody else. That's not my problem. And I'm much better at understanding that just being me and being present and being sociable still without drinking is who I am now. And that's okay. And they can think whatever the fuck they like.
Yeah, that's it. It's it. I once heard someone say, what other people think of me is none of my business.
Yeah, exactly. That's so true. I asked somebody this on my little Cuppa community. We were asking the question, like, what responses do you give if someone says, God, why aren't you drinking? And one of the girls had said to someone, why are you so obsessed with me?
That's brilliant.
It's none of your business. Me not drinking doesn't impact anybody, unless you have a drinking issue. Then you probably think I'm a party pooper. So email me when you're hungover sometime.
Exactly right. So Vic, you just mentioned the Cuppa community. Can you tell us a bit more about that and why community is so important along this sobriety journey?
Well, there was never a place that I found that had everything. And I just always got people like emailing me saying, what do I do? What do I do about my drinking issue? And I'd be like, get a therapist, do this, do that. And I thought, God, what can I do to create something for people to go, right? They asked me that question, you go here. So I've created a free online community. It's Cuppa, CUPPA.community. You just search for that. It's free to join. And on there's all sorts of courses. We've got William Porter's course, Sarah Rusbatch's course, the Thrivalist course. So you can pick and choose a course that suits you if you fancy doing something like that. There's events all over the world. There's Zoom calls. So it's a massive hub for the sober and sober curious community that's free to use. The courses cost money, but there are a few free ones on there as well. And it's just a place. It's basically Facebook for sober people. You can post photos, you can post advice, you can post news stories, pictures of you, counting how many days you're sober. And it's just a really friendly place to be. So highly recommend going on there. I didn't have that place when I first got sober. And it's a real joy to be able to say to people and answer that question and say, just go here. There's everything you need on there.
It's incredible. Thank you so much for your service putting that together. What a gift to give back to everybody.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
I want to ask you a question that might seem really obvious, but I want to know in particular in relation to your relationships with your partner and your children, how has your life changed since getting sober? I can imagine that itch that you needed to scratch has gone now. And perhaps you can be more present as a mum.
Yeah, absolutely. That preoccupation has gone. The preoccupation with alcohol, I don't have to think about it anymore. Occasionally, I get sort of flashback of those moments lying in bed with my finger on my pulse, thinking I was going to die. I think that is how I accepted my life. That's how I thought that was okay to feel like that. And I can never, ever feel like that again. I literally don't feel like I would survive another anxiety attack. I mean, I'm not perfect at all. Like, I still shout at my kids. I'm really messy. I eat badly. I just did the sugar episode for my podcast and I realised that I have a massive sugar issue as well. I almost said anything's okay in moderation, but of course that's not true. I just feel like I'm a bit better than I was. I'm not, it's not all rainbows. I still cry myself. I still scream into a pillow and have to go for walks when the kids are annoying me. It's still hard life. It still has sharp corners that I have to sort of avoid and get through the other side of unaided, which can be quite hard. You know, there are times when the image of a frothy cold beer sort of pop into my head. But I know that that's not a reality. That's a fantasy. I know that it's not one beer I'd had. I would have downed two and then, you know, been unwell and rolling around on the floor within an hour. I just know that alcohol doesn't work for me. I don't miss it, and I enjoy my life now. I live for my days. I don't live for my messy nights. Life for me is the days now. I'm happy and content at night to snuggle up and watch a movie and be quite quiet. And I understand that being boring is okay. I'm not boring. I'm just not partying, and that's all right. My kids are happier. I do wonder what will happen when they get a bit older and they start to drink, perhaps. Like I do have my concerns about that. But all I think is I don't want them not to drink. All I want is them to have a choice. And I didn't have a choice growing up. And I think by creating an alcohol-free household, I am now giving my children a choice and educating them about what alcohol can do.
It's really powerful just to be able to lead by example.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, it'll be up to them if and when they come to that point. Vic, do you have any set tools or techniques that you implement on a daily basis to help support your recovery?
Gosh, there's probably so many that I'm doing that I don't even realise. I've learned with the cravings that it's me creating them. That's a good point. You know, they feel like a bolt out of the blue, whereas in fact I know that I've created that need now, and knowing that I create the need myself I can sort of nip it in the bud before it starts. So those moments between 7 or 5 and 7 where I would have poured a glass of wine before, I'm able to get through those without feeling the craving, because I just know that alcohol doesn't work for me anymore. And I always say in my podcast, just go and put the fucking kettle on. There's something to be said. It's very English, but there is something to be said with just, I remember the first time I didn't drink and my hand was in the fridge poised over a bottle of wine, and it was a simple thought, was just put the fucking kettle on.
So it sounds so simple, but it's so true, isn't it? Like, I'm sitting here with my cup of tea right now. I've never drunk so much tea since getting sober.
I say that to so many people, but there are so many things. It's the boundaries thing. It's the, knowing when to leave a party, being prepared. If you like alcohol-free drinks, like having some of those in the fridge to lean to, having a bar of, a lint balls or, a bar of chocolate, whatever it takes to get you through to not drinking. And I think the only tip is, like, you've only got to do one thing. And if you're in early sobriety and you're thinking, oh God, this is too much and I can't do this, you've only got to do one thing, which is just to not put a drink to your lips. And if you can just think about that one thing, it kind of lets everything else dissolve around you. There's only one thing you've got to do, and everything else will fall into place. And I know it feels wobbly at the beginning and it feels scary, but giving up drinking, I assure you, and I say it to everybody who asks me, it will be the best thing you ever do in your whole life. It just means your anxiety goes. Lucy, who I used to do the podcast with, she stopped taking her depression tablets that she thought she had for years and years and years. And everything changes. You feel healthier and you feel happier, and you become one of those smug people running down the seafront with their pram and their... Don't worry, I'm not quite there yet.
What would you say to someone then who's listening, they're hearing this message, but they've got that chronic fear of missing out? They're thinking to themselves, how could I possibly enjoy life without having a beer on Christmas Day or toasting a glass of champagne at my daughter's wedding?
I would say missing out on what? Missing out on what, really? Come on, if we were really go into it. So you're missing out on the high of that first glass of wine. So there you go. You're like 1 or 2 glasses in and you feel there's a very short-lived moment where you go, right, oh, I'm peaking. I'm having a really good time and I feel really, really, really good. And that's okay. And then it's just downhill from there. So what are you missing out on? Making a fool out of yourself, perhaps falling over, perhaps dribbling on someone, perhaps sleeping with someone you've never met before and getting a venereal disease. Like, these are all things that I did. So I'm coming from experience here. I'm not judging. And I just think, well, what good ever came of it for me? Like, we talk about FOMO, fear of missing out, but fear of missing out on what? What was it? Just that momentary feeling. And I think we all live for highs and lows in our life. And I think sobriety is about trying to live on this more contented line and realizing that these ups and downs, this wiggly line is leaves you vulnerable and leaves you scared or really happy that has a come down. Like, living at this more content line is a much safer and a much happier place to be. And that's what I'm still learning. I sometimes strive for highs, like by doing something weird, like, jumping off a cliff, or like, I did zip lining and diving while I was in Thailand recently. All of these things, I try and push myself out of my comfort zone, which is great. But it's because I'm still trying to find the highs in life. Whereas in fact, I think there will come a point in sobriety where you just go, this is okay, and I'm happy with my lot. And I think FOMO just means, you're missing out on who you once were, and actually you can look forward to who you will be.
Because that's what sobriety does, doesn't it? It gives us almost this profound shift in perspective. It's not necessarily that our lives, the externals change, but the internals take this cataclysmic shift, and we just all of a sudden experience life through a new set of glasses. And that's where I relate so much to that contentedness. Like, when people ask me how I am these days, I don't strive to answer with happy. Like, that's not my goal anymore, to be happy, because the opposite of happy is sad, right? Like, I just want to be, like you said before, that peace, that tranquility, that contentment. That's my goal every single day.
Yeah, what a lovely goal that is. That makes me feel relaxed, you even saying that. Yeah, that's my goal too.
Vic, I have absolutely loved chatting with you today, and there's one final question that I have for you. I'd love to know, what are your 3 non-negotiables that allow you to live your life today happy, joyous, and free?
Oh, God, that's a good question. Well, I don't allow alcohol really in my house anymore, which is a huge step for me, because I was always people-pleasing and allowing everyone to come over and have drinks, and I've started to feel uncomfortable with it. And now I've decided not to give it as a gift, which is, I always gave bottles of wine to people. And now my husband's just given up drinking in the last 6 months, so we don't really have any alcohol in the house. So I sort of, without really realising it, I've kind of made our house alcohol-free, which I haven't told some people yet, but when it happens, I'm going to have some uncomfortable conversations, and I probably will get talked about behind my back as a total party pooper. But I have to do what's right for me, I think, in that one. And I think I'm going to try and stick to my guns on it. So that is becoming non-negotiable.
I love that.
I don't like going out late, and I don't like people trying to get me to stay out. Once I said no, that's it, I'm out. If people start going, come on, it is a no-go. Once my mind is made, I have to get out of that situation. And it's usually when I'm out for a dinner and people are starting to get a bit loud and a bit pissed. I just feel uncomfortable about it, and I don't know what to say, and I feel awkward. And that's why my podcast is called Sober Awkward, is because of that exact feeling. It's like, I do still occasionally feel awkward when I'm out, and I'm trying to push against it. But socially, being sober can feel quite overwhelming, and it's just about knowing when to leave. And now I know when to leave, and that's great. And the third one is that there must always be lint balls in the fridge. That is non-negotiable.
That is awesome. I completely agree with you. Lint balls for life.
In the fridge, I'm just trying to think, actually. I'd actually prefer them outside the fridge. I like them at that point where they're really kind of soft. I don't like them too hard, lint balls.
Yes, definitely. And I imagine living on the Sunshine Coast, it's that fine line between not
Very
getting them.
fine. Very fine. Yeah.
Vic, thank you so much for joining me here today. Your story is awesome. Everything you do in the sober community is just brilliant. If people listening want to find you, follow you, where should they go?
Yeah, my Instagram is @drunkmummy, That's my blog as well. And, if you are struggling with your alcohol and you need some help, just listen to the Sober Awkward podcast from the beginning. The first couple of series are with my friend Lucy, who was a stay-at-home drinker. And we follow her journey pretty much from day one, from giving up. And now I host it with my friend Hamish, who is a single 31-year-old. He's a dad, he's not single. He is 31 years old and he has given up drinking for the podcast. So we're now logging the journey of a sober, curious dad, which has all other sorts of interesting angles. And he's really funny. So it's a comedy podcast. Don't think it's going to be like a big drain upon you. It is going to be a comedy podcast, and it's about learning to navigate life as an ex-boozer. So definitely tune into that.
Brilliant. I'll make sure that I pop all of that information in the episode show notes. We say here on Behind the Smile that when we recover loudly, no one needs suffer in silence. So Vic, thank you once again for your time, for being here today. I'm beyond grateful.
Thank you so much.
A big thank you for tuning in today. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by clicking the subscribe button and leaving a review. Every review helps this podcast become more discoverable, meaning more people can hear these stories of strength and hope. Together, we will continue to remove the stigma around mental health, trauma, and addiction. Remember to reach out to those you care about, and I'll see you next time.